Is this on? Nope. Hello? Oh, do I have to do something? That way?
It's on top.
Oh, it's on top? Da, da, da.
There we go.
You did. Love it. As you can see, I changed my title, because I'm always changing my titles. And really, I want to say thank you so much for being here. I think my talk's going to be a little bit different, because my business is about making the work environment a work environment that is very positive towards HCI and UX. And so I've come to talk to you as a leader, manager, strategist of how do I build teams and how do I sell what the teams do and how do I influence collaborations. And so some of the things that you will hear, I think, from Nashir and after that are about teams are things that I think are the sorts of things I'd like to take away and try and implement. And see how I can scale them. So I'm very much looking forward to the next two talks. So translating impact. Well, the first bit of good news is that I just did a bit of what technologies are coming down the pike and what's being predicted. And there's a lot. So we've got work, people. There's work for us for the whole future. Because many of these are very kind of fetishizing of the technologies themselves and don't really talk about the people. And so there is a big scope for us to have influence going forward. So many of you will have seen this particular definition. I like it. Human-computer interaction is a discipline concerned with the design, implementation, and evaluation of interactive computing systems for human use and with the study of major phenomena surrounding them. I love this definition because it's big, it's expansive, it's multidisciplinary. It's collaborative and cooperative. It is intentionally about impact, about change, about learning and changing. And then this is, oops, what happens. This is very sensitive, isn't it? Can someone redesign it? What happens when you get into a production environment like the one I'm in? And this is not actually any product manager I could currently work with. But so I've got that big expansive definition of HCI, right? I'm coming to have impact. Hey, do you find any evidence for what we're building? I really think we're on the right track. Get me the data to prove it. I think this is the best prototype idea, and this is how I want you to evaluate it to prove its worth. I just really need to get this launched.
Right.
Sounding familiar? Yeah. And you kind of like scratch your head and you go, which planet did you fall off? Well, the real thing is that it's a planet of a different discourse. It's a planet of a different set of motivations. It's a planet that we need to understand. And so everything in this talk is going to be about how we turn our skills, our empathy skills, our perspective-taking skills on ourselves and our context, and how we meet people where they're at. And so, blimey neck. Right. I'm afraid. So this is called changing the culture of production, where that culture of production is our area of study. It is our area of experimentation, testing, reflection, and sharing. It is our culture of, if you're currently a faculty member working with somebody in industry, partner with them on this. If you're currently a student thinking of going into industry, be aware that your translational skills and your persuasion skills are going to be absolutely a priority. I often hire wonderful people who think that they're going to spend 80% of their time doing design or research. And I'm like, 50%. Because we have to do a lot of translation work. And so I've been really interested in this notion of HCI as translational. And here's a paper from some of our colleagues in our community. And this really resonated for me, which is that I feel like my life is, the goal is influencing the design of interactive systems, the adoption, implementation, and institutionalization of the theoretical findings or empirical findings that you're getting from deep research into design practice, and into influencing product management and engineering. And Jody, sitting at the back, and I have talked a lot about learning a lot about the cultures of product management and engineering so that we can do that translational work. So I'm going to talk just about a few of these efforts, and I'm just going to skip over. Thank you to Sonia for getting these beautiful little sketches for me. I'm going to talk a little bit about production teams, which is where I do a lot of my work, and a little bit about the processes and tools of production, scaling from the small teams that I manage all the way up to one of the roles I have at Google, which is to co-chair the UX Leadership Council, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Of course, in our world, evaluating products and platforms for usability and utility and more is something that we train in, we teach, we believe, we breathe. And evaluating the value added or not, and societal impacts is something that we've been talking about a lot today. So I feel very inspired by a lot of what I've heard. Because these are the sorts of things that I think of as design practice and production practice. I just want you to see that. This one didn't want you to, but I wanted you to see it. So yeah, evaluating the products and platforms. Now, one of the things that we teach, one of the things that we practice are a host of different techniques and methods for understanding whether the products or platforms that we build and put out there really work or don't work, or for whom and why. Data fumes is one way to have a look, logging, analysis. And I find working with communities like this, what are the right techniques? Where can we innovate? Where can you think of new ways of doing those evaluations that I can get in at scale? Very important conversation. So this is adapted from something out there. I mean, it's everything from ethnographic field studies, through card sorts, through customer feedback, standard techniques. But what do we need to do, and where do we need to innovate here? And I'm looking to you all to help with that. So evaluating the value or not of societal impacts. Well, somebody just mentioned money in the last session. I think it was Sarah. Money. Money is really important as a motivator, everybody. No surprise. This is a story from Jared Spool, the $300 million button. Has everybody heard of this? No? Well, it's a great story. So one of my lessons I'm going to share with you is that whenever I go in to try and persuade to get headcount or funding to start a research group or start a research program, I love to tell stories of delight and stories of horror. So this is what happens in the medical world if you don't design effectively something horrible. This is what you get if you design very well. And this could be something really small that scales. But everybody loves a good story. And so Jared was invited to look at this particular shopping site. And they said, well, why have we got huge attrition? People come in and abandon straight away. And, well, the reason is that you spend ages shopping, putting all of your stuff in, saying, hey, this is what I want. And then they ask you to register for an account before you can check out. And Jared just looked at this and scratched his head, and he did a few interviews. And he said, take that out. Get them to make an account later. Let them buy stuff. And if they like your site, they will come back, your service. And this is what one of the people said. I'm not here to be in a relationship. I just want to shop. And that actually, got the money, $300 million for the company. Now, something thoughtful and small can lead to a huge impact for a company. And so don't underestimate, what the small thing can do to change and have a major impact and get you huge credit. That's what I always tell my folks, massive credit. And it doesn't mean that it's easy to have this insight. This is an insight about trust and about people's time and people's value. And so the mutual value for the company or the service and the person is what we're always trying to look for. And as per the sessions we've been hearing, in the short and long term. So another way of estimating value, this is from Ben Schneiderman. I love it. It's called his tire tracks diagram. One of the other things that I look to the scholarly community to help with, because often internally at Google and the other companies I've worked, this is not the kind of work that I can do very well, which is to trace over time the impact we've all had as a community. To understand and do the weaving back to the influences that have led to major, major different markets. And the reality is most of my friends, most of my colleagues, most of my VPs don't know these stories because we're so immersed in these histories that we think everybody understands them. So tell the stories. That's part of the translational work of threading back and saying, this is what I'm working on right now. And we heard about speculative design earlier. Through speculative design, we can start to think what might be possible in the future. James did a nice job of thinking about 2030. And what would it look like to have the workplace of the future? But what does the work consist of in the future? And what are the threads now that are going to lead forward? I also love this particular model, and I use it all the time. It's from error ergonomics and medical informatics. And it's basically this idea that right here at the bottom, you might have a user touching that button, that $300 million button, but actually helping people to understand, look, there's groups of people working on these things or working together. I think maybe we'll hear a little bit about that interconnection from other talks today. Organizations are impacted, whether it's as simple as we made some more money or, oh, there's an innovation that could lead to something. And then all the way up to governments. And again, we've heard a lot of talks today which are really around changing policy potentially, changing guidelines, sharing guidelines for design and human-centered design in terms of methods. One of the things that I had my team do when I was managing research for material design was take the research methods we were using and publish those. So we have the results that go into the shaping of material design as a design system, Google's main design system. But we also exported the methods that we used and our philosophy of use. So thinking about this, when I talk to my partners, at Google and at other companies, I say, you might think UX and HCI lie here. But actually, when you look at the amazing community we have here, together and collaboratively, we can change policy, we can change communities, we can influence, and we can collaboratively and in a participatory way change. Because one of the amazing things when you're a scholar in this area, UX, HCI, design, is that we have an amazing community. And not all disciplines, I think, can say that. One of the ways that we can work with you is there's Dan Russell, my colleague, and there's a bizarre picture of me, but I quite like it. I don't even know what I was doing with my earring, but don't ask. Please have a look at Google University Relations, because we do have collaborations and grants that we give. And Dan and I are the HCI reps. He, in fact, sent me some large number of things to review, which I will do on the plane going home. But some of those bigger questions that we don't have time to do or that are not internally necessarily valued, we do in partnership. And I think everybody knows when somebody tells a company or maybe your team or your boss from the outside something that you've been saying for 5 years, they go, oh, that's a really good idea, isn't it? So, you coming in and helping us with the research and me being able to say, these amazing scholars have shown this. It's really critical. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about these, which is where I spend most of my time. So production teams. Actually, I'm going to go back for a second and say, one of the things I've been working on quite a lot is that I deeply believe, and I think nobody's going to disagree with me here, is that if you have a production team, whether it's a small service or a platform or an application that is very diverse, multidisciplinary, we heard that word, with people with very different backgrounds, you actually get much more interesting discussions and reflections. So creating the culture of production is really important to me. So I'm on hiring committees. I work on hiring pipeline committees to try and not just go to the same schools all the time, but to try and mix it up a little. I try to get people who have a very different background from the background that they're currently, or the work they're currently doing. So you might come from, you know, a PhD in Sanskrit, and you become interested in coding, and you become a UX engineer. I just like, wow, those kinds of paths are so interesting. And you might have people who have much more quotes unquote standard paths. But if you have a few people in the mix who bring a very different approach, it makes such a difference. And so the production team is really important. I also work with my team on a lot of the content strategy for the internal documentation. As was mentioned, my current focus is on a next generation operating system. And so there's a lot of trying to get the language of the code and the documentation to be really inclusive. The case studies that are inspirational to be a little unusual, so that the very milieu within which we sit becomes a little bit more open to ideas. So the production teams, to me, are really important, and really fostering a culture of open, positive questioning, critical in the best sense of the word, production. And so here's a sort of maturity model that I like to use. And Heather Cassano, my colleague, came up with this a while back, and I've just adapted it. If this is what I see as UX and HCI in many industry contexts, right over here we see nobody with a background. And UI and design, UI is mostly design, not id, although maybe that's psychoanalytic that I wrote that. And most design is done by engineering or PM. Designers typically are junior, and nobody really knows who the user is, or the user is absolutely everybody. Not super helpful. There's no UX research and no deep foundational research, typically. It's this like flywheel, speedy flywheel. Styling is mostly visual and interaction design, all very important. UX tends to be under-resourced, focused on launches, not landings, where landing is a demonstrated success of value for your target population. Limited UX research and no foundational research. No future thinking, just thinking to immediate product needs. Then you've got process, which is, my VP says, let's invest in this thing. You've got reviews, planning and prioritization. You have program managers, I'll come back to that in a second. Design systems, qualitative and quantitative research, content strategy, and a focus on accessibility, sometimes just as table stakes, but you can start to get that in earlier if you change the production tools. Evaluation on a longer horizon, potentially. And then you've got strategy, where great HCI and UX is an absolute must. Now that's where I always want us to get. And I've managed to do that 3 times at Google. So I'm pretty happy. And I'm going to tell you how in a second. HCI, research, qual and quant, influences planning. It's ahead of the game. It's in the road mapping. It's in the objectives and key results specification. There's a clear vision, metrics frameworks that are based in human needs, not just system performance, but human performance, and executive leadership commitment. And I want us all to work together in all contexts to help each other to get to there. So there's 5, I'm going to move this now. There's 5,000 plus UX people at Google. Visual design, graphical design, interaction design, qualitative research, quantitative research. It's a community. It's a big community. And this doesn't include research with a capital R, which has its own whole organization that many of us partner with. They tend to do more of that foundational technical research, and then where the people try to figure out where to stick it. I have to have impact with it. And there's a lot of folks in the research world who do that too, but we tend to partner. One of the things that we find, which is about a changing of a culture, this is not ours, but it's just a ratio thing, image, is that you often have 1 researcher, 5 designers to like 100 developers. Now Now that's why we need to be on our toes. And that's why we need to work together. And you see that number moving as you move towards strategy. You see headcount coming in and people valuing design and research ahead of time and more foundational research. So that's a metric that I use to push to see how successful we're being. The other is, I mentioned language earlier. Research, design, and engineering, getting a triad model where each is equal. We talked about power in a different context. But we work in an engineering organization where product managers are key. Understanding the language, understanding the perspective, and that you're in a mental model space that needs to be changed is really, really critical. And saying, you're wrong, is not helpful. The power of persuasion and storytelling was mentioned earlier. So this is the UX Leadership Council that I'm one of 9 leaders sitting on. I'm the one on the council who has the sort of big R research background. Many have great design backgrounds, but I work with the UX Research Steering Committee at Google, which I was one of the co-founders of also before I stepped onto this leadership council, to really get ideas flowing. Promoting healthy UX practice is all about thinking around what are the measures and metrics we use to see whether we're successful, including those ratios, and that triad model. To what extent is that conversation a real exchange? Talent, mobility, and development. This is an area that I spend a lot of my time on, from the hiring to the making sure that our researchers get promoted, that they get the metrics there for showing the impact of their work, and that they are elevated and talked about in terms of the work. UX community and culture is trying to make 5,000 people plus really feel like they're in everything together. And we have a fantastic leader there who, like newsletters, and we have an internal university where once a year we come together in a conference and people speak. And we have communications and operations about the Leadership Council itself. And so I do a lot of research with volunteers to understand what's happening in the community, to understand satisfaction, happiness levels of our researchers and of our designers, because then I can start to use the council to push up and ask for more resources. And we've moved a bunch of the ways in which people are feeling by doing this kind of internal research. We do a lot of assumptions workshops with our partners, engineering and PM, to understand what are their measures and metrics. What languages do they have? And these build incredible bridges, because, you know, once we're back in person now, but it used to be you do the workshops, and then, of course, you all go for dinner, and then suddenly everybody wants to talk to everybody, and you're creating a culture of collaboration and knowing each other. We do insights reports on what are the tools, research tools and design tools, and where we're doing well and where we're not. Because if we don't give people tools, they can't do the work, right? And so we've managed to get a lot of investment in tools and consistency across tools, so that, you know, if you're in one group and you're in another group, you're using the same tools. And so we can reuse knowledge. We don't reinvent knowledge. There's an infrastructure team run by Dawn Herman, who is fantastic. And this team does all of our consent and recruiting, pools of participants for studies. A lot of a move now towards community research, trying to do all of the things that were discussed in the last session, which is really be kind of inclusive of the community needs by understanding the community. And the infrastructure team, I work with very closely, and I do a lot of budget reviewing with them around where the investments should go for tooling. This is my little team. Whenever I get a headcount, the first person I always hire is somebody who does research and design ops, a program manager. Because the first thing I want to do is, what are we working on? And we come out with these once a quarter, these stats. Things like work requests, meaning our partners have come to us. Now, usually when I start one of these teams, I'm hustling. I'm out there hustling. And I'm saying, we don't get tasked, we get asked. What are your needs? Let me understand. And then I track these measures to see how we're doing culturally in terms of not body embedded, but idea embedded. Are our ideas and languages being taken up? Office hours consultations, completed projects, peer bonuses. So at Google, we give each other a thank you, and I record all of those when my team members get thank yous. We use the objectives and key results model to see if we're laddering up to the whole of the big team, the engineering team, and the product area, and Google. And then we have a look, and we do a score, and we're very honest about the score. And then we go and have a look about what we can do differently. And I always have newsletters. Another thing I set up, always have newsletters, because you're trying to get the knowledge out there. And typically, the newsletters tend to be taken up outside of even the group. Buganizer. If you're working in an engineering company, wherever the bugs are, there shall you go. Because if I can demonstrate that in year 1 of the team, there were no UX or HCI bugs, and then year 3 or whatever, there's quite a lot, and I can show that the resolution time has reduced, that tells me that I've got engineering buy-in and collaboration, because we're doing it, we're changing it. I always used to like to say, if we really believe in accessibility, all accessibility bugs will be P0, aka a #1 priority, and they will be resolved really quickly. The rubber hits the road there. And there's a research archive at Google, and so very much in keeping with my academic background, I have everybody put in reports, and then I look to see how often, they have been downloaded or looked at, and then I sort of push them out there. I've mentioned the newsletter, that's that. I also run a talk series completely outside of the group, but in collaboration with the UX Research Steering Committee and the Leadership Council. And it's called The Bigger Picture. Somebody said the bigger picture in the last session. And that's where I invite fantastic, deep thinkers with incredible research chops, doing incredible research, to come and speak across Google to the research community at Google. Beware, you may get an email from me. Because that makes such a difference, because you see everybody get inspired. Because I'm always saying, it's not just the pixels, it's the products, the platforms, the programs, and the policies. And so I love bringing in people to inspire, that we can go from that sharp to blunt end. So here's where I want to be. I'm going to wrap up now, but here's where I want to be. I need your help. That's why I'm here, to task you all. And these are some of the words I heard. Speculative design. Are the benefits worth the harms? Can we get that conversation into the PMs and the road mappers early? Move away from build it just because we can. Test it and just test it on ourselves. No. Multidisciplinarity, and it takes a long time. But the small wins being documented, I think, is encouraging to everyone else. So there we are. That's my little 4 model. And thank you, but questions later.